This is Capitol View with your host, Jesse Tenor.
This week, we welcome Democratic congressional candidate Clarke Tucker to Capitol View. During our conversation, we talked about the big issues in his race against Congressman French Hill, including health care, tariffs, and the polls showing the race tightening. In this Web Extra, you'll see more of our interview, including Tucker's thoughts on work requirements for Medicaid beneficiaries. Speaking of accessibility when it comes to health care, you voted against the work requirement for the state's hybrid Medicaid expansion program, Arkansas Works. And so now that we have been seeing some concrete numbers come out from DHS, what are your initial thoughts now that we're the first state to implement the requirement?
It's similar to when the issue was in front of the legislature. I think able-bodied Americans who aren't caring for a dependent or aren't full-time students, we should create systems and constructs where we encourage them to work. But we also want people to have access to care, and responsible governing is about balancing things. And in this particular example, it's those two things. What we've seen recently is in states that expanded Medicaid, it actually helped people get employed. And that makes sense because if you're not healthy, then you can't work. And when people had access to care, it actually enabled them to work in a way they had not been able to before. So if we put on requirements, we may actually hurt people's ability to work at the same time we're hurting their ability to have health care. Then the second part of that is 92%, and these are nationwide numbers, they're not Arkansas numbers, but 92% of adults are either working, they're ill or disabled, they're caring for a dependent, or they're full-time students. So what we're really talking about is 8%. And when you create a whole government construct to test whether these people are working, number one, you're growing government. And number two, in Arkansas, it's based on the internet. And unfortunately, right now, we're 48th in internet connectivity as a state. And what we have already seen real-life examples of people who are working, and now they're denied access to care because their internet access was not good enough. And we're not doing our jobs as a government when that is the case. And so a critical part of that I would love to work on in Congress is to make sure that everyone in the United States, particularly in places, rural places like we have here in Arkansas, we all have access to high-speed internet. It's a huge impact on our economy moving forward, but in this particular example, it determines whether or not you can have health care.
And I mean, that there is something to be said for that being a part of some of those numbers, but what do you think of the governor and then Cindy Gillespie, the DHS director, coming out and saying, some of these numbers could indicate, though, that people have moved, that people have gotten on their spouse's insurance, that people have gotten another job? I mean, do you take that into consideration with some of those numbers, or are they too glaring?
It's just too small a sample size, really, to know what the result is. I think probably some of that is true, but some of it we know because we've heard reports that people just have lost care because they don't have access to the internet.
Okay.
And that's unfortunate.
And you can see the full episode of this week's Capitol View, including my interview with Senator Tom Cotton, by clicking the link below. And we want to know your thoughts on all of the issues we discussed during Capitol View, among the many others affecting our state. So use the hashtag MyCapitolView on Twitter and Facebook anytime so we can continue the conversation together. And don't forget, Capitol View airs at 8:30 Sunday mornings on KARK right before Meet the Press.